Hey guys, Infidel 1258 here. Today I want to talk to you about a question from the audience, specifically around the idea of inflation. One of the main arguments that I raise when I'm talking to you guys about the value proposition associated with Splinterlands is I say to you that these assets, these non-fungible tokens that we're receiving for our time and attention, are actually deflationary in nature. What does that mean? It means that there's only so many to begin with. And the number of cards available is always shrinking because we're merging them to grow their power level. At the same time, the number of players in the economy is growing because the game is attracting new players. That means there's increased demand with reduced supply, and that's a recipe for increased price appreciation. That's why they're deflationary in nature. Inflationary would be the opposite, which means that there's an increasing supply. There's an ever increasing supply, maybe ad infinitum, to the point where buying a card today is actually going to be not logical because the next one tomorrow or the next day or the next week or year is going to be cheaper. And here's the thing. A lot of people drop this comment or a comment like it that we're going to address today. They say things like, it's not deflationary because there's always new packs. There was alpha, then beta, then untamed, then dice, then Chaos Legion. Now there's going to be Rift Watchers and so on and so forth. Every one of these is increasing new supply, which is going to detract from the value proposition of holding these cards long term. I want to unpack this conversation because I need you guys to understand what is going on here. And if you don't, you're not going to appreciate what Splinterlands is offering. If that sounds interesting, stick around and stay tuned. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dwayne Cunningham and I go by Infidel 1258 and I cover Splinterlands all day, every day because it's changed my life. Let's get into it. So it stems today. I mean, I get questions all the time about it, but Ola Art dropped a comment on a video that I did about water and death speculation on new summoners that are coming out. So that was a fun conversation with Jim Morgan. If you haven't seen it, you might want to check it out. Jim had the idea that perhaps death or water are due for an archery buff summoner, which is certainly possible, and it makes a lot of sense when I think about it because they haven't had one before, whereas other splinters have. On that topic, Ola dropped a comment saying, if more cards are created like Chaos, then that's a form of inflation. So Chaos cards right now are cheap and will increase in price in the future. But if the team releases another group of cards, then those Chaos cards will eventually get cheaper. So this idea that as they release new cards, they're going to undercut the value proposition of the existing cards, and in so doing, make it irrelevant that you won't need to own that old card. You won't need those alphas. You won't need those betas. You won't need those untames or dice. Maybe even one day you won't need Chaos Legion. On the face of it, superficially we can respond to the comment really quickly by saying it's not so, because the new cards that are being created are never duplicates of the old cards, with the exception of beta, which was unique in the fact that they didn't understand how quickly alpha was going to get sold, I think, and then ultimately how fast there was only small growth at that time, but still it was too big for their smaller team. Their team has grown a lot. So they duplicated beta cards as a workaround to create new cards available for play, to let the economy and the ecosystem grow, allowing new players to come online, while again not reinventing the wheel with the deck. But that was one exception. Now, as the team has grown, and as we look at the evolution of the cards, you can see alpha has all alpha cards were duplicated in beta, all of them. But beta brought in neutral, so it wasn't exactly 100% duplication. But for instance, let's look at, now they're all different prices, but if we just grab spine back, I type in the word spine and it's going to give me all the monsters with spine. You got spine back wolf beta, spine back wolf alpha, spine back turtle beta, alpha. And they each have different price points because they're different cards with different collection power, and they each have different number of BCX that's required to reach various levels. So they are different in some key important ways, but they are identical in their abilities at various levels. So the Spineback Turtle has thorns at level 4, and the Spineback Turtle has thorns at level 4. That's beta and alpha. Beta is going to require 12 BCX to get there. Alpha is going to require 9 BCX to get there. At times, those differences are substantial, and at times, the cost differential can make owning alpha more, preferable to owning beta. But that's getting away from. This is all to say that this is the one instance in the game's history where cards have been replicated in a way that I think is akin to what he's describing. The commenter is saying that when they create new cards, they're going to create new cards that are of similar kind and quality, that are going to detract from the valid or the desire to own, in this case, alpha. And in to his defense, in defense of his point, the Spineback Beta is an example of why you wouldn't want an old Spineback Alpha. But at the same time, it isn't, because Spineback Alphas have different collection power per BCX to 30 versus I think 15. Yep, it's double the collection power for the alphas. And you might say, oh, I don't care. Like that's a trivial, inconsequential distinction. The problem still stands that it's the exact same card. Okay, this is one instance in the game's history where that is true. But this is the exception, not the rule. And actually, I gave you a key reason why that ever happened in the first place. Their team was smaller, and at the time they needed to get more cards out to let the economy, let the ecosystem grow. So they had to, by necessity, copy some cards. But they did add to it, because you'll notice that there is no alpha neutrals. These are all the neutrals from the alpha or beta, and these are all beta because none of these cards existed. So they expanded on it. So beta is different in this major sense. And this example is the sole example in the history of the game where this has happened, and they've spoken to this issue since then. They've said the alpha beta was a moment in time where we lacked the resources to grow. Ever since then, we've been growing with substantial advancements, including Untamed, which was 1.5 million packs and brought out a wide range of totally different summoners, totally different monsters. And summoners is a good way to look at it. When you look at the summoners and you want to begin to understand how the game has evolved, you can see that it's not a case of copy paste. It's a totally distinct game now, and it has been ever since Untamed came out. Kitty, Jotun, Scarred Llama have revolutionized the meta of this game. And yeah, Chansey's is great. Swimmer has his role. Nightshade's amazing. In their own sort of niche, I would say they're not in the same ballpark as the other three. And so that point if you agree that Kitty, Llama, and Jotun have changed the meta, have redefined the meta, then you have to also admit that Untamed brought something new to the game. And it's not a replica of what Alpha or Beta offered. It's not a replica of what we saw in the promo cards. And just from summoners alone, that point has to be true. And so I think that is one amazing point of evidence that says, no, yeah, it has happened at times between Alpha and Beta. It's not something they're aiming at doing regularly. In fact, they've aimed directly at providing new utility with new cards. And so on that point, maybe we'll further expand on that first because I want to really hit this home. This is clearly different. Untamed versus Beta, for instance, and we'll call Beta and Alpha the same. But Untamed versus Beta, you look at the summoners. The Beta summoners are usually down here because they're more expensive. We had plus magic. Minus melee. Let's just look at Beta for a sec. Okay, plus melee, minus melee, armor, heart, and plus magic, and then those were the rares. So those are the ones that most people were playing with. You always had certain rich people who had access to some of these legendaries. Those are not everybody's, right? And like most people don't have access to necessarily these epics or legendaries. People who are getting started with a budget, they're going to go for rares. That was true before, it's true now. And so let's look at basically the rares and understand how different they are also, because we talked about the legendaries. Clearly these guys are amazing, but these are nothing like our Untamed summoners, are they? Rin is amazing. It's nothing like Scarred Llama. Plato is amazing. It's nothing like Jotun. Selenius Sky is great. I mean, it's pretty basic in comparison to Kitty, you have to admit. And Peak Rider, I guess, is kind of like Chansey's. I'm going to say that there's some crossover there, but for me that feels lore specific, because I think of White as being very armor heavy, And that's why I would argue that Chanceus with his repair and I think he has armor is makes a lot of sense. But they're still distinct, and the 5 mana versus the 7 mana makes it also distinct, and makes these guys probably playable in certain games where the others aren't. So that I'm just reeling off differences here. You know, you have to see that. You can't say that these are identical to what we have now in Untamed, or for that matter, Dice, which is altogether different again. But before we move into Dice, let's touch on these ones again. So Magic Melee, very basic one buff summoners, and then in Untamed we saw very similar opportunities. Right, there's Eastwood, which is kind of a counter to the life summoner that dropped 1 armor. The addition of 2, or sorry, the removal of 2 is equal to the addition of 1, because when you play a negative summoner like Eastwood, or for that matter Bortus, you have to understand that you might do a negative play, and your opponent sidesteps your nerf, right? If you go ahead and play Eastwood because you think you're countering an armor play, and your opponent plays no armor, you've gotten nothing out of it. As opposed to if you play a positive buff like a Mother Kala with the 1 heart, you're always going to enjoy that benefit, regardless of whether your opponent tries like extra melee, or for that matter even minus 1 heart, which is it doesn't change the fact you've neutralized a component of their attack. Offensive or beneficial buffs to your team are, in my opinion, stronger than negative ones. But Eastwood is essentially a counter, not a copy of what we saw in some of the beta summoners. Bortus is a counter, not a copy of what we saw in the beta summoners. Pyre is totally different. Fire used to have +1 melee, now they have +1 speed. Camilla with the dragon is different than the archery that we saw with Selene Sky. And so it's just, at every level, these are totally different summoners, and their teams as a result are necessarily different. Without spending an hour going into every single splinter and seeing how every single monster is different, which they are, it's important to note that the summoner defines the foot that you're stepping forward with the team. If you play Bortus, you're not necessarily going to throw out 5 or 6 magic monsters, because that's not his forte. You might instead go like a void tank, you might go melee focus, you might go archery focus, because you're not seeing the plus magic of Alaric. And so the summoner is the defining, is usually the defining backbone of your entire team. It doesn't have to be so. You can play Bortus and then drop magic monsters, of course. But the point is, the distinction, the obvious distinction here in these summoners should point out that there is continued and growing obvious distinction amongst the different splinters across the different expansions. And Dice is again no exception. With Untamed, we saw ability focuses like magic, armor, hearts. Those are archery, melee. Those are or sorry, not ability. What would you call those? Like base bonuses, I'm going to call them. And then with Dice, you saw abilities with Magic Reflect, Flight, Piercing, Snare. I think it's called Holy Shield, and Thorns. Totally different, unlike anything we've never seen that before. And so I think I've just with summoners alone, I've really shown that this is not, his point is just not true. While you might say Ouster is a death summoner, and therefore I don't need old death summoners because I can buy Ouster, or for that matter, I can buy, the newest Chaos Legion death summoner, Thaddeus. That is true, but to equate them to one another is to entirely misunderstand how the game works. Thaddeus is nothing like Ouster. In fact, Ouster plays off of your opponent having high magic, whereas Thaddeus intentionally nerfs your enemy's magic. That's one example, but there's countless examples. And so where I think maybe we move to now is just an analogy that I often say to people who drop this comment, which is this: when we talk about cryptocurrency and we hear from Bitcoin maximalists, who are people, if you don't really know crypto, Bitcoin maximalist is a phrase that refers to an individual who desires the mass adoption of crypto, but specifically and exclusively Bitcoin. They don't value other cryptocurrencies. They don't see utility in a broad diversity of blockchains or use cases. They say Bitcoin is the only one that's necessary, and it can probably at one point be developed upon in ways that will unlock some of the utility that we're seeing currently in platforms like Ethereum, because dApps could theoretically run on the Bitcoin blockchain. I think that argument is largely nonsense. I think Bitcoin is wonderful in many ways, but it is what it is. To then try and make that square peg fit in a round hole doesn't make any sense to me. And I would argue these are Thaddeus Brood is a square peg, and Ouster is a round peg, and Contessa Lament is a triangle peg, and they all fit different niches and opportunities. They have their limitation and their strength. They're going to work really well with certain monsters and not others, and that dramatically that means in both examples that while you might argue Bitcoin is excellent at what it does, you need to also understand it doesn't do everything. In the same breath, a card like a Contessa, which is a Death Splinter, and versus a Thaddeus are very distinct. And that distinction is the foundation upon which we can conclude that this game will continue to grow value and price appreciation for the card assets they're creating. It isn't so that once you get Thaddeus, which is the cheapest Death Summoner right now, that you never need another summoner in your career of playing this game. Is that right? Thaddeus is $3. Yeah. So Thaddeus is the cheapest, and the commenter might argue, once I get Thaddeus, I don't really need any others. Or they might try to argue, it sounds from the comment that they're actually of the opinion, if more cards are created like chaos, then that's a form of inflation. No, because inflation requires that the things being created are the same. That's my main thrust. I haven't clearly articulated. If I haven't clearly articulated that yet, I want to right now. Inflation requires that the new creation is fundamentally the same as the old. When we see inflation in the US economy, it's because the Federal Reserve is printing US dollars, fiat currency. They're printing more and more currency into existence at a whim. And when we see new packs coming out in Splinterlands, whether it's ever since beta, because beta, like I said, is an exception, Dice, Untamed, Chaos, Rift Watchers, and forevermore, my expectation would be that the team understands the concern you're raising, and they've deftly maneuvered around that hazard. And I've shown you in this video evidence of that, their intentional efforts to avoid the exact peril you're concerned about. And if you think that the new form of cards are equal to or duplications of the old monsters, I think you lack experience in the game. And I don't say that to be insulting or denigrating. I'm actually trying to speak to a broader audience and let them understand how distinct they are, and then how important that distinction is. And so I don't agree that it's deflation or it's inflationary when they create new packs, so long as those new packs are unique in their abilities and unique in their mana costs and unique in their collection power and perhaps unique in the leagues they can play within. Gladiators, for instance, are playable only in brawls. They have nothing to do with the rank battle play. That's an example of how they can have unique utility. Alphas and betas have significant bonus. I think alphas have a 10% bonus on your rank battle rewards. Betas have a 5% reward bonus. These bonuses are going to carry over into land. This utility is written into older cards, but not newer cards. And one day newer cards will be older cards, and they will have their own certain bonuses. So there are so many distinctions and separations and bonuses and considerations and, ability differences and, synergies that can come out of the distinctions that do exist. For you to imply that they are equivalent is very deeply mistaken. Okay. And then the idea that the price would be impacted in the future about from the existing cards being created today because of new cards to come later, again, is fundamentally incorrect, because it's and necessarily so, because you've come to that conclusion based on the idea that they are inflationary in nature, and that presumption was just mistaken. It's mistaken because you're suggesting that all black summoners are equivalent to one another, new ones, old ones, and of course they're not. We spent the first 10 minutes explaining that. So if the team releases another group of cards, then those Chaos Legions cards will become cheaper. This could be true. And let's finish here. He says, so if the team releases another group of cards in the future, let's even say after Rift Watchers. Rift Watchers is the next one coming out, and then eventually there's going to be another full set. Let's say that next full set, which is maybe even 2 years away, who knows? First of all, let's talk about when it'll come out. It'll come out when the game needs it. I feel very strongly that Splinterlands will not release that brand new expansion, the full expansion, which will follow Rift Watchers. I feel very confident that it will not come out until all of the Chaos Legion and all the Rift Watchers are sold, and at a time when the audience, the people playing this game, are eager to see a new pack released. I feel confident about that. You might disagree. That's part of my trust and faith in the developers of this game, and them understanding the fact that we don't want to bombard people with too much. So that's an assumption I'm making. If you feel I'm mistaken, maybe drop a comment on that one, because I'd love to go back and forth on that too. But that's an assumption I'm making, so I want to be clear about that. And as he says, if the team releases another group of cards, and those cards could theoretically drive the cost of Chaos Legion, which is the current pack being released, down. But only if, hear me, only if those new cards somehow replicated, duplicated, made older cards redundant and unnecessary. And that's never been the history of this game, with the sole exception of beta, and I gave clear reasons why that was so at the beginning of the video. If you agree with the foundation of my argument that every single summoner of every single Splinter, with the exception of Alpha and Beta, are unique and their differences are substantial, then I think you must conclude, well, I'm going to say there's one more little caveat. If you agree that the summoners across all of the various levels, Alpha, Beta being one, Untamed, Dice, Chaos Legion, if you agree that all those summoners are unique and substantially different, and if you believe that these developers have shown themselves to be trustworthy and good stewards of the economy and of the development of this game, you might disagree on that. And if you do, that's a huge deal. But if you agree on those 2 points, then I think you have to conclude what I conclude, which is that no, new cards are not inflationary. They are distinct, and they have a different use case, a different utility, and a different value proposition than older cards will ever have. And that's by design. It's not an accident. Everything from collection power to in-game battle bonuses to the leagues in which you can play these cards within, to increasing the opportunities for bonuses. When we get land, we're going to see alphas and betas getting again another bonus for their use on that land. And so there's this growth of development of use case and utility around older cards specifically, which is always going to build in intrinsic value in the holding of those, not to mention their collectible nature, because they are exceedingly rare. And as our population, as our audience grows and grows and grows, that collectibleness is actually something that is itself a feature. It is itself a reason why one would even want to hold these assets, these older alphas, these betas. Even maybe one day Untamed will fall into that category. Okay, so I do feel strongly that, Ola, you're mistaken in terms of whether these cards are inflationary in nature. I strongly believe that they are deflationary in nature, and I've said that so many times. So I really wanted to spend this entire video responding to your comment because I believe if I'm wrong on this issue, I'd love to hear it in the comments, because that's actually so key to my understanding of the utility and the use case and the value proposition of this game. And so this is something that I want to get right. And if you guys out there think I'm missing something here, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to Ola for dropping the comment. I hope this has been received in the manner I'm trying to deliver it, which is, a healthy conversation between two people, and not as a denigration of you or your opinion. I love discussions like this. Thank you, Ola. And next time you drop a comment, be sure to drop your in-game name so that I can send you a little thank you for this sort of video. I appreciate people like yourself who drop comments that help drive content, because it's never just you that is interested and curious about the topic you're writing about. It's always a broader interest and audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And to everyone else, especially my members out there, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and have an amazing day. God bless.